A 7-year-old orphan stands in a silent courtroom, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, I want you to adopt me." The room gasps. Judges don't take in children. But as the judge meets her tear-filled eyes, something inside him shatters. He tries to say no, but she won't back down. "You make the rules, right? Change them." Then, a whisper from the social worker sends a chill down his spine. She's being sent to a new foster home tonight. A home hiding a dark and dangerous secret. What happens next will test him, break him, and change their lives forever. Will he risk everything to save her, or will it be too late? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across courtroom 4B, painting golden stripes on the polished wooden floors. Judge Henry Calloway's fingers drummed against his desk as he prepared to wrap up another draining week of family court cases. His black robe felt especially heavy today, weighing on shoulders already burdened by decades of difficult decisions. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old wood filled his nostrils, a smell that usually brought comfort but today only added to his weariness. If there are no other matters before this court, his deep voice echoed through the nearly empty room, bouncing off the high ceiling and wood-paneled walls. "Your Honor, I want you to adopt me." The words, spoken in a small but clear voice, stopped time itself. Calloway's gavel, halfway through its downward arc, froze in midair. His steel-gray eyes widened slightly as they found the source, a tiny figure standing at the defendant's table, her brown eyes fixed directly on him. The child's gaze held such intensity that it seemed to pierce straight through his carefully maintained judicial facade. Maya Brooks. The 7-year-old had been in his courtroom 3 times this year already, each appearance marking another failed placement, another disappointment in a system that seemed determined to let her down. Her purple sweater, slightly too big for her small frame, hung loosely around her shoulders. Someone coughed nervously. Papers rustled. The afternoon sun continued its slow descent, unaware of the extraordinary moment unfolding beneath its rays. A wall clock ticked steadily, marking each second of the heavy silence. "Maya." Calloway's voice came out rougher than usual. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Maya, that's not how this works." The words felt hollow, even as he spoke them. The girl's small hands gripped the edge of the wooden table, her knuckles turning pale with effort. "You make the rules, right? Change them." Her chin lifted slightly, showing a determination that belied her years. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like waves on a pond. In the back row, a reporter's pen scratched frantically against paper, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed room. Martin Thompson, standing near the judge's bench, shot his boss a concerned look, his eyebrows knitted together in worry. Calloway felt something crack in his carefully constructed wall of professional detachment. The girl's words had found a weakness, a hairline fracture created 15 years ago when he'd lost his own daughter. He pushed the memory away, as he always did, but today it refused to retreat completely. "Young lady," he began, his tone gentler than usual, "there are very specific rules about adoption. Judges cannot adopt children from their own courtrooms. It would be—" He searched for words a 7-year-old might understand, his fingers absently straightening the papers before him. "It wouldn't be fair to the other children." "But you're fair," Maya insisted, her voice trembling slightly. A tear threatened to spill from her right eye, but she blinked it back fiercely. "Everyone says so. You could be fair to me too." Ms. Harding, Maya's social worker, stepped forward, her sensible shoes making soft sounds on the wooden floor. Her face showed the weariness of someone who had delivered too many disappointments to too many children. The silver threads in her dark hair caught the fading sunlight. "Maya, honey, we'll find you a good home. I promise." But Maya's eyes never left Calloway's face. "Please," she whispered, the word hanging in the air like a prayer. "I'll be good. I'll be really quiet when you're working. I won't ask for much." Each promise felt like a testament to past rejections. The words struck Calloway like physical blows. He saw his own daughter in those pleading eyes, the same desperate hope, the same need for love and security. His hand tightened around the gavel until his knuckles turned white, the smooth wood warm against his palm. "Maya," Ms. Harding said softly, gathering her papers with practiced efficiency. "We need to go now. It's getting late." As she passed the bench, she paused. "Your Honor," she whispered, her words meant only for him. "She's being transferred tonight. Another foster home." The resignation in her voice spoke of too many similar situations. Calloway watched as Maya was led toward the courtroom doors, her small shoulders slumped in defeat. Each step seemed to echo in the hushed room, the sound of her scuffed shoes on the floor painfully loud. Her purple sweater seemed to swallow her whole as she walked away. His throat felt tight, and for the first time in years, he found himself without words to fill the silence of his courtroom. The afternoon sun had almost disappeared now, taking with it the golden stripes that had decorated the floor. In their place, long shadows stretched across the room, as dark and heavy as the thoughts weighing on Judge Henry Calloway's mind. The empty courtroom felt colder somehow, as if Maya had taken all the warmth with her when she left. The streetlights blurred past like dying fireflies as Maya sat in the back of the government-issued sedan, her small fingers wrapped tightly around Oliver, her worn stuffed rabbit. The toy's once soft fur had been loved nearly bare in spots, its floppy ears stained with tears from countless lonely nights. But to Maya, he was perfect. Her only constant friend through 6 different foster homes. Ms. Harding glanced in the rearview mirror, her tired eyes meeting Maya's. "The Coopers are very experienced foster parents, Maya. They've helped many children. I really think you'll be happy here." Maya didn't respond, just pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. She'd heard similar words before, and experience had taught her that adults' promises often shattered like thin ice. The car turned onto a quiet suburban street lined with identical houses, each one trying desperately to outshine its neighbor with perfect lawns and gleaming windows. Christmas lights still hung from some eaves, though February was almost over. The Cooper house sat like a giant wedding cake at the end of the cul-de-sac, pristine white siding, manicured shrubs, and warm yellow lights that seemed to promise comfort. But something about it made Maya's stomach twist into knots. The perfection felt artificial, like a mask hiding something ugly underneath. Sheila Cooper appeared on the front porch before Ms. Harding could even cut the engine, as if she'd been watching from behind the curtains. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her smile wide and practiced. "Well, aren't you just the cutest thing?" she cooed as Maya climbed out of the car, her voice sticky sweet like syrup left too long in the sun. The woman's floral perfume was overwhelming, making Maya's nose itch. Maya clutched Oliver closer, taking a small step backward until she bumped against the car. There was something wrong about that smile. It didn't reach Mrs. Cooper's eyes, which remained cold and calculating, like a predator sizing up its prey. Mr. Cooper emerged from the house, his broad frame filling the doorway. His shadow stretched across the porch like a dark stain. He nodded curtly at Ms. Harding, but barely glanced at Maya, as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture being delivered. "Let's get this paperwork done," he said, his voice flat and businesslike, already turning back toward the house. While the adults handled the formalities inside, Sheila led Maya on a tour of the house. Everything was immaculate, not a picture frame crooked, not a cushion out of place. The air smelled strongly of bleach and lemon cleaner. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum where children weren't allowed to touch anything. Maya noticed there weren't any family photos on the walls, just generic landscape paintings. "And now for your room," Sheila announced, climbing the stairs to the second floor. Maya's heart lifted slightly. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. But instead of stopping at any of the closed doors in the hallway, each with a shiny brass knob, Sheila continued up another, narrower staircase. The steps groaned under their weight, and the temperature grew noticeably warmer. The attic door creaked open, revealing a space that made Maya's hope crumble like wet sand. A thin mattress lay directly on the wooden floor, accompanied by a single thin blanket that had seen better days. Cardboard boxes and old furniture created shadowy mountains around the small, clear space. cobwebs stretched between the rafters like ghostly fingers. "This is your space," Sheila said, her sugary tone evaporating like morning dew. Her face hardened, all pretense of warmth vanishing. "Stay out of the way and we won't have any problems. No coming downstairs unless called. No noise. No mess." She rattled off rules like she was reading a grocery list, each one another bar in Maya's cage. "Bathroom visits, morning and evening only. Meals will be brought up. Touch nothing that isn't yours." Maya stood frozen, Oliver crushed against her chest, feeling the rabbit's worn, stuffing compress. This wasn't a bedroom. It was a prison cell with a slanted ceiling. A spider scuttled across the floorboard near her feet. Downstairs, she could hear Ms. Harding's voice fading as she prepared to leave, taking with her Maya's last connection to the outside world. Sheila's smile snapped back into place as she headed for the stairs, the wooden steps protesting under her feet. "Get settled in, and remember, children should be seen and not heard." The door closed with a decisive click, followed by the unmistakable sound of a lock turning. Maya sank onto the mattress, which crackled beneath her. Plastic, she realized. The attic air hung heavy with dust and staleness, making her throat feel tight. A single bare bulb cast harsh shadows across the cramped space, making the boxes loom like monsters in waiting. Through a tiny circular window, she could see the last traces of daylight fading from the sky. She lay down, pulling the thin blanket around her shoulders, Oliver tucked safely under her chin. The mattress might as well have been made of stone. Above her, something scurried across the roof, probably squirrels or rats. The house creaked and settled, making unfamiliar sounds that echoed in the empty space. A draft whistled through unseen gaps in the walls. For the first time since that afternoon in the courtroom, Maya felt doubt seep into her bones like cold water. This wasn't just another disappointing placement. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. She hugged Oliver tighter, trying to draw courage from his familiar presence, but even her faithful friend couldn't chase away the growing fear that this house held darker secrets than just a dusty attic. Maya woke to the tantalizing aroma of bacon drifting up through the floorboards of her attic room. Her stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since lunch yesterday at the courthouse. Clutching Oliver to her chest, she crept down the steep attic stairs, trying to avoid the spots that creaked. The old wood threatened to give her away with every careful step. The kitchen gleamed with morning sunlight bouncing off spotless granite countertops. A feast was spread across the island. Fluffy scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, golden toast with real butter, and fresh orange juice in crystal glasses. Maya's mouth watered at the sight and her empty stomach clenched painfully. Sheila stood at the sink, her back turned as she loaded the dishwasher. Her expensive silk robe swished with each movement. Without looking up, she said flatly, "We eat first. You eat what's left." She pushed a paper plate toward Maya with a half-eaten piece of cold toast and some bacon crumbs, the plate sliding across the pristine counter with a scratching sound. Maya's shoulders slumped as she slid onto a kitchen stool, its metal legs scraping against the tile floor. Randall Cooper sat at the head of the table, hidden behind his newspaper, but she could feel his cold eyes watching her over the top of it. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the clink of Sheila's diamond rings against the dishes and the rustle of newspaper pages. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the tension, and Sheila's entire demeanor changed as she answered it. Her voice dripped with false warmth, like honey masking something bitter. "Oh, hi there. Yes, everything's going just wonderfully with our new little one." Maya picked at the dry toast, pulling off tiny pieces with trembling fingers, trying not to listen, but Sheila's words carried clearly through the kitchen. "The check cleared already? Perfect." Sheila twirled the phone cord around her finger, the diamond ring catching the morning light. "Oh, we'll keep her till summer at least. Then we can move her on. You know how it goes. These temporary placements are such a blessing." Maya's chest tightened, each breath becoming harder than the last. The toast turned to sawdust in her mouth, and she struggled to swallow. She'd heard similar conversations before in other homes, but something about the Coopers' calculated coldness made this different. Worse. Much worse. Randall folded his newspaper with precise movements, his eyes never leaving Maya. The paper crackled as he aligned its edges perfectly. He didn't speak, just watched, like a hawk studying a mouse. Maya hunched smaller in her seat, wishing she could disappear into the worn fabric of her day-old clothes. That night, lying on her thin mattress in the drafty attic, Maya held Oliver close to her face, breathing in his familiar, comforting scent. The wind rattled the single window, making eerie whistling sounds through the old frame. Shadows from the streetlight danced across the ceiling like reaching fingers, stretching and contracting in the darkness. "I don't belong here," she whispered into Oliver's worn fur, her voice barely audible even to herself. The stuffed rabbit's black button eyes seemed to shine with understanding in the dim light. He was the only one who truly knew her, who'd seen every tear and heard every prayer for a real home, who'd been her constant companion through every failed placement. The sound of Randall's heavy footsteps on the stairs below made Maya pull her blanket up higher, her heart racing with each thud. She could hear Sheila's shrill laugh floating up from somewhere in the house, probably counting tomorrow's foster care payment. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the sounds, trying to remember Judge Calloway's kind eyes, even when he'd had to say no to her request. His face was the only warm memory she had from yesterday. The attic felt more like a cage than a bedroom, and Maya was just another bird they'd trapped inside it. She curled into a tight ball on her mattress, still wearing her clothes from yesterday. She hadn't been given any others, not even pajamas. The wind continued its lonely song outside as Maya lay awake, counting the hours until dawn, wondering how long she'd have to stay in this cold house that would never be a home, no matter how many days passed. Judge Henry Calloway stared at the stack of case files on his desk, but his mind kept drifting back to Friday afternoon. Maya's small voice rang in his ears. "You make the rules, right? Change them." He rubbed his temples, trying to focus on today's cases, but her pleading brown eyes haunted him, following him into his restless dreams the night before. The morning light filtered through his office windows, casting long shadows across his polished wooden desk. The familiar scent of leather and old law books did nothing to settle his unease. He opened Maya's file for the 10th time that morning, scanning the details he'd already memorized. 7 years old. Parents unknown. 6 foster homes in 3 years. Each page told a story of disruption and displacement that made his chest tighten. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Martin Thompson stood in the doorway, 2 coffee cups in hand, steam rising in delicate wisps. His assistant's keen eyes took in the open file and Calloway's troubled expression, reading the situation with the expertise of someone who'd worked alongside him for over a decade. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" Martin placed 1 cup on the desk, the rich aroma of fresh coffee filling the air. Calloway straightened, his face hardening into the mask he'd worn since losing his daughter. "I have work to do, Thompson." "Sure you do." Martin settled into the chair across from him, unfazed by the gruff response. His knowing smile suggested he saw right through his boss's facade. "That's why you've been staring at the same file all morning." Before Calloway could reply, Ms. Harding appeared in the doorway, looking harried as usual, her glasses slightly askew and her cardigan buttoned wrong. "Judge Calloway, I wanted to update you on Maya Brooks. She's settling in well with the Coopers, their experienced foster parents." Something in her tone made Calloway's neck prickle, a familiar warning sensation he'd learned to trust over his years on the bench. "The Coopers? Tell me about them." "Oh, they've fostered dozens of children over the years. Very clean home, good neighborhood. They always pass their inspections with flying colors." Ms. Harding shuffled through her papers, the sheets rustling nervously in her hands. "I have their file here somewhere." Martin caught Calloway's eye, his expression mirroring the judge's concern. They both heard what she wasn't saying. Quantity didn't equal quality. Years of courtroom experience had taught them both to listen for the spaces between words. After Ms. Harding left, Calloway turned to his computer. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up records on Randall and Sheila Cooper. Something didn't feel right. The couple had indeed fostered many children, but none stayed longer than 6 months. No adoptions. No long-term placements. The pattern was too neat, too consistent to be coincidence. "Martin," he called out, "get me everything you can on the Coopers' previous foster children. School records, medical reports, anything. Something's not adding up here." Martin nodded, already heading for the door with purposeful strides. "On it. I'll start making calls right away." Alone again, Calloway reached for his phone. His hand hovered over the receiver, trembling slightly. Who would he even call? What could he say? That he had a bad feeling? That a little girl's plea had cracked something open inside him that he'd kept sealed for years, bringing back memories of another child he couldn't save? The phone sat silent, heavy with possibility and doubt. Outside his window, dark clouds gathered, matching his troubled thoughts. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a warning of the storm to come. The doorbell's chime sent Maya's heart racing. She'd been sitting on the pristine living room couch, carefully holding her worn, stuffed rabbit Oliver so he wouldn't dirty the fancy cushions. 3 days in this house had felt like an eternity to the young girl. Sheila Cooper's heels clicked across the hardwood floor as she hurried to answer the door. Before opening it, she shot Maya a stern, warning look that made the little girl's stomach twist with dread. "Ms. Harding, what a lovely surprise." Sheila's voice dripped with false sweetness as she swung the door open. Maya's social worker stood on the porch, clipboard in hand, her kind eyes filled with concern. Maya started to stand, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest, but Sheila's manicured fingers clamped down on her shoulder, the pressure not quite painful, but the message clear. "Stay put." "I'm just here for a routine check-in," Ms. Harding explained, stepping inside. Her gaze found Maya's, and she asked gently, "How are you settling in, sweetheart?" Maya's mouth went dry, the words she desperately wanted to say getting stuck in her throat as she noticed Randall's massive frame filling the doorway to the kitchen. His arms were crossed, his cold eyes fixed unblinkingly on her. He didn't speak, he never did, but his mere presence felt like a heavy weight pressing down on Maya's chest, suffocating her. "Oh, tell her how much fun you're having, sweetie." Sheila's fingers dug deeper into Maya's shoulder, a silent warning. Clutching Oliver tighter, Maya's small fingers trembling, she managed a tiny nod, her eyes fixed on the floor, too afraid to meet Ms. Harding's gaze. "See, she's adjusting beautifully," Sheila gushed. "We're so blessed to have her." Ms. Harding smiled, making notes on her clipboard. "That's wonderful to hear. Maya's had such a difficult time finding the right fit." The adults continued talking, but Maya could barely hear them over the pounding of her heart. She watched helplessly as her chance for help slipped away, Ms. Harding unable to see past Sheila's perfect, deceptive facade. Nobody could. Later that night, Maya lay curled up on her thin mattress in the drafty attic, tears soaking her pillow. The wind rattled the window, and shadows danced across the walls. Sheila's cruel words from earlier echoed in Maya's head. "Nobody's coming for you, little girl. You're stuck here until we say otherwise." Squeezing Oliver tight, burying her face in his worn fur, Maya realized a hard truth. If she wanted to escape this place, she would have to do it herself. Nobody else was coming to save her. With renewed determination, she vowed to find a way out no matter what it took. Maya's heart thumped against her ribs as she watched the glowing numbers on her digital clock. 12:01 a.m. The house had finally fallen silent, except for Randall Cooper's deep snores drifting up from the master bedroom downstairs. The sound made her skin crawl, even from 2 floors away. She hugged Oliver close to her chest, his worn fur soft against her cheek. The stuffed rabbit had been her only constant friend through 6 different foster homes. "Tonight's the night," she whispered into his floppy ear. Her small fingers trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "We have to be brave." The attic felt colder than usual as Maya slipped out of bed still wearing her day clothes. The fabric scratched against her skin, but she hadn't dared change into pajamas. She'd planned this carefully, watching the Coopers' routine for weeks. Thursday nights, Sheila took sleeping pills that knocked her out cold. Randall always dozed off watching TV after his 3rd beer. Maya pulled her backpack from behind a stack of boxes where she'd hidden it. Inside, she'd already packed a water bottle she'd smuggled from dinner and the granola bar she'd saved from lunch. She'd wanted to take more food, but anything missing would have made them suspicious. She tucked Oliver safely inside, leaving his head poking out so he could breathe, just like she'd done when hiding him from the older kids at her last home. The wooden floor creaked under her feet as she crept toward the attic door. Each step felt like an eternity, and her heart pounded so loud she was sure it would wake the whole house. Maya's breath caught in her throat as she reached for the brass handle. The metal felt ice-cold against her palm, sending shivers down her spine. She turned it slowly, praying the hinges wouldn't betray her. But the old door had other plans. A long, low creak split the silence, sounding as loud as a scream in the quiet house. Maya's heart stopped. Footsteps shuffled in the hallway outside. Heavy, deliberate, getting closer. The familiar thud of work boots against carpet made her blood run cold. She stood frozen, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps paused right outside her door. Maya could see the shadow of feet in the crack beneath, and the faint smell of cigarette smoke seeped through. 1 second passed, 2, 3. Then, mercifully, the footsteps moved away. Maya waited until they faded completely before releasing her breath, her lungs burning from holding it so long. With shaking hands, she pulled the door open just wide enough to slip through. The hallway stretched before her like a dark tunnel, lit only by the faint glow of a nightlight at the far end. Family photos lined the walls. Perfect poses of Sheila and Randall, but no children. Never the children. Maya had asked about it once, and Randall's cold stare had told her never to mention it again. Maya remembered what she'd overheard yesterday through the heating vent. We'll move her along before summer. Just like all the others. Just like Jenny last month, and Tyler before that. The stairs were her next challenge. She knew which ones creaked. She'd tested them during the day, pretending to play while mapping her escape route. 3rd step from the top, safe. Skip the 5th one completely. The 8th step was okay if you stayed to the right, pressing against the wall where the wood was most solid. Her sock-covered feet moved carefully down, 1 step at a time. Randall's snores grew louder as she descended, rumbling like distant thunder. The living room TV cast flickering blue shadows on the walls, making ordinary objects look twisted and strange. Finally, her feet touched the 1st floor. The front door stood just ahead, a dark rectangle against the pale wall. Freedom was so close she could taste it, sweet and terrifying at the same time. Maya took 1 step forward, another. The carpet muffled her footsteps as she crept closer to the door, her heart beating so fast she felt dizzy. Her fingers had just brushed the cold metal of the doorknob when a voice broke the silence behind her, rough with sleep and anger. "Where do you think you're going?" Maya's scream pierced the darkness as Randall's iron grip closed around her small wrist. She kicked and thrashed wildly, her feet connecting with nothing but air as he lifted her off her feet like she weighed nothing at all. Her worn backpack slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a soft thud and spilling its meager contents across the hardwood. Oliver, her beloved teddy bear, tumbled away, landing in a patch of silvery moonlight streaming through the window. "Let me go." Maya's voice cracked with fear and desperation. "Please, please." "Oh, sweetie." Sheila's syrupy voice drifted down from the top of the stairs, dripping with false concern. She stood there in her pink quilted bathrobe, arms crossed over her chest, a cruel smile playing on her perfectly painted lips. "You really thought you could leave us after everything we've done for you?" Hot tears streamed down Maya's cheeks as Randall dragged her up the stairs, each step a painful ordeal. Her feet scraped against the wooden steps, her wrist throbbing and burning where he held her in his vice-like grip. She tried to twist free again and again, but his thick fingers only tightened until she whimpered in pain. "Stop squirming," he growled, his first words to her since she'd arrived at their house 3 weeks ago. His voice was rough like gravel, matching his stony expression. At the top of the stairs, Sheila reached out and grabbed Maya's chin with surprising strength, forcing the girl to look into her cold eyes. "Did you think we wouldn't hear you? That you could just sneak away with our money like some little thief?" Her perfectly manicured nails dug crescents into Maya's soft skin. Stupid, ungrateful girl. Randall hauled Maya down the shadowy hallway toward the attic stairs, his footsteps heavy and determined. She caught glimpses of the other bedroom doors through her tears, all locked from the outside with heavy deadbolts, she realized with growing horror. The thought made her stomach turn. How many other children had tried to escape before her? How many had failed? The attic door creaked open on protesting hinges, and Randall shoved her inside with enough force to make her stumble. Maya fell onto the thin, lumpy mattress that served as her bed, clutching her injured wrist to her chest. The skin was already turning an angry purple where he'd grabbed her. Sheila followed them into the musty space, her shadow looming over Maya like a dark specter. She leaned down, bringing her face inches from Maya's, close enough that the girl could smell her expensive perfume. The sweet, motherly mask was gone now, replaced by something cold and terrible that made Maya's blood run cold. "If you try that again," she whispered, her breath hot against Maya's ear, "you'll regret it for a very long time. We know how to handle troublemakers like you, don't we, Randall?" Maya curled into herself, trying to disappear into the thin mattress as if it could swallow her whole. She heard the heavy door slam shut, followed by the distinctive click of multiple locks engaging one after another. Heavy footsteps retreated down the creaking stairs, leaving her alone in the darkness. In the oppressive silence, Maya's shoulders shook with silent, racking sobs. She crawled across the rough wooden floor on trembling hands and knees, searching desperately until her fingers found Oliver's familiar soft fur in the moonlight. Clutching him tightly to her chest, she retreated to her mattress like a wounded animal. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her only friend in the world, her voice barely a breath in the darkness. "I'm so sorry I got us into this." Her small fingers gripped his worn fabric as fresh tears soaked into his matted fur. The tiny flame of hope she'd held onto so tightly, through all the foster homes, all the disappointments, all the broken promises, finally began to crack and dim. Maya cried until pure exhaustion overtook her, her small body trembling even in fitful sleep. Her dreams were filled with endless locked doors and menacing shadows that reached for her with cruel hands, while Sheila's mocking laughter echoed in the distance. In the corner, Oliver kept his silent vigil, the only witness to her pain. Maya's eyes fluttered open in the pre-dawn gloom. Every muscle in her small, thin frame ached from the previous day's harrowing escape, but a spark of determination still burned within her. She lay motionless on the thin, lumpy mattress, listening intently for any sounds from the house below. The silence was deafening, save for the gentle whisper of wind seeping through a loose vent cover she hadn't noticed before. Her heart began to race as she studied the metal grate. It wasn't properly secured. One corner hung slightly away from the wall. Wincing at the pain in her bruised wrist, Maya slowly rose to her feet. The vent was just high enough that she had to stretch to reach it. Her delicate fingers curled around the edge, and with a careful tug, the grate came loose with only a soft squeak. A rush of cold air poured through the opening. Maya peered out, catching a glimpse of the slanted roof below, glistening with morning dew. Fear gripped her stomach, but the memory of Randall's vice-like grip on her wrist spurred her onward. She squeezed through the narrow vent, her slender frame barely fitting. The roof tiles were slippery beneath her bare feet. Maya crouched low, shivering in her thin pajamas as she crept toward the edge. The ground seemed impossibly far away, but thick bushes grew along the side of the house. Taking a deep breath, she slid down and let herself drop. The branches scratched her arms and face, but they cushioned her fall. Maya bit her lip to stifle a cry as she untangled herself from the bush. Her feet touched the cold grass, and without a moment's hesitation, she ran. The empty, darkened streets were a blur as Maya fled, her bare feet slapping against the rough sidewalk with each agonizing step. The cold air burned her lungs, but she didn't dare slow down. Tall buildings began to emerge in the distance, and the towering courthouse rose up against the pale morning sky like a beacon of hope. Maya's legs were shaking so badly she could barely stay upright, but she pressed on. Just then, the heavy courthouse doors swung open, and Judge Calloway stepped out, his briefcase in one hand and his coat draped over his arm. He looked weary from a long night's work, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. He stopped short when he saw the small, trembling figure before him. Maya, her pajamas torn and dirty, dark bruises visible on her wrist, tears streaking her face, her bare feet scraped and bleeding. Their eyes met across the empty street, and in that moment, A profound recognition passed between them. Two lost souls finding each other in the quiet dawn. The courthouse parking lot was nearly empty as Judge Henry Calloway stepped out into the chilly night air. His shoulders ached from hours bent over case files, and he fumbled with his keys, ready to head home after another exhausting day. As he turned to lock the heavy wooden doors, their ancient hinges creaking in protest, movement caught his eye, a small figure stumbling across the concrete towards him. His heart stopped. Even in the dim light from the flickering street lamps, he recognized those tight curls, that thin frame. Maya, but not the hopeful child from his courtroom days ago. This Maya was different, barefoot, shivering, her pajamas dirty and torn with what looked like grass stains on the knees. Before he could process what was happening, she crashed against his legs, tiny fingers clutching desperately at his suit pants. Her whole body shook with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. "Please," she begged, her voice muffled against the fabric, raw with fear. "Please don't send me back." Calloway stood frozen, his keys dangling forgotten in his hand, the metal cold against his palm. The weight of her small body against him felt both foreign and familiar, stirring memories he'd locked away years ago, of another little girl who used to cling to his legs, begging for just one more bedtime story, her laughter echoing through happier times. "Judge?" Martin Thompson's voice cut through the night like a blade. His assistant emerged from the courthouse doors, briefcase in hand, his tie loosened after the long day. His eyes widened at the scene before him, immediately understanding something was terribly wrong. Heavy footsteps approached from the security booth. The night guard, an older man with graying hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes, walked toward them with purpose, one hand resting on his hip near his holster. "Sir, do you know this kid?" the guard asked, eyes narrowed with suspicion as he surveyed the unusual scene. Calloway cleared his throat, finding his voice beneath layers of shock and memory. "Yes," he said stiffly, the word coming out rougher than intended, scraping against his dry throat. Without letting himself think too hard about what he was doing, Calloway bent down and lifted Maya into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her small frame racked with tremors that seemed to shake her entire body. She buried her face in his neck, her tears hot against his skin, her breath coming in hiccuping gasps. The security guard watched them carefully, but something in his expression softened as he took in Maya's bare feet and obvious distress. He stepped back, giving them space, his hand dropping away from his hip. Calloway turned to Martin, who already had the courthouse doors unlocked again, the keys jingling in the silence. They stepped back into the quiet building, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls like distant thunder. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as they made their way to his office, Maya still clinging to him like a lifeline, her small fingers digging into his shoulders. Inside his office, Calloway gently lowered Maya into his large leather chair, the material creaking softly under her slight weight. She looked even smaller there, curled up against the dark material, her feet barely reaching the edge of the seat. Her eyes were red from crying, and now he could see the bruises, purple marks wrapped around her tiny wrist like a bracelet, telling a story that made his blood run cold. Something hot and dangerous flared in his chest at the sight, a protective fury he hadn't felt in years. He knelt down in front of the chair, trying to keep his voice gentle despite the anger building inside him, threatening to burst out. "Tell me everything," he said softly, watching as Maya hugged herself tighter, her eyes darting between him and Martin, who stood guard by the closed office door, his face set in grim determination. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Judge Calloway's office, casting long shadows across Maya's small form. She sat curled in his leather chair, drowning in a borrowed police blanket, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of chamomile tea that Martin had brought her. Her bare feet, now cleaned and bandaged, dangled far above the floor. The scratches on her ankles were stark against her dark skin, telling their own silent story of her desperate escape. Calloway pulled his chair closer, keeping his movements slow and gentle, like approaching a wounded bird. "Maya," he said softly, "can you tell me what happened?" She stared into her tea, her fingers tightening around the cup until her knuckles paled. The silence stretched long enough that Calloway wondered if she'd speak at all. Then, in a whisper barely louder than a breath, she said, "They hurt me." The words hung heavy in the air, each syllable a weight pressing down on Calloway's shoulders. His chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady, years of courtroom experience helping him maintain his composure. "How did they hurt you, Maya?" Tears welled in her eyes as the story spilled out. The cold attic where they locked her at night, the missed meals that left her stomach aching, the bruises hidden beneath her pajama sleeves. She spoke of dark closets and harsh words, of promises broken and hope crushed. With each detail, Calloway's jaw clenched harder, his hands balling into fists beneath his desk until his nails bit into his palms. Martin stood by the window, his usual witty demeanor replaced by grim concern. The morning light cast shadows across his troubled face as he caught Calloway's eye, shaking his head slightly. "You can't just keep her here, Henry, you know that." His voice carried a note of sympathy beneath the warning. Before Calloway could respond, Ms. Harding burst through the door, her face flushed from rushing, her typically neat blazer slightly askew. "Judge Calloway, I came as soon as I—" Her words died as she saw Maya's condition, the bruises, the torn clothes, the fear that radiated from her small frame. "Oh my God." Calloway reached for his phone, his voice hard as steel, crackling with barely contained fury. "I'm calling child services. The Coopers need to be investigated immediately." Ms. Harding stepped forward, her professional mask cracking under the weight of guilt and shock. I had no idea. They seemed so perfect on paper." She reached for Maya, but the girl shrank back, pressing herself deeper into Calloway's chair, making herself as small as possible. "No," Maya whimpered, her small hands clutching the blanket like a shield. "I want to stay with him." She looked at Calloway with desperate eyes, filled with a trust he hadn't seen since his daughter's passing. "Please don't make me go." Ms. Harding wrung her hands, her clipboard forgotten at her side. "There are protocols we have to follow. The system ... The system failed her," Calloway cut in, his voice sharp enough to slice through steel. He watched Maya trembling in his chair, so small, so vulnerable, yet showing more courage than many adults he'd seen in his courtroom. In that moment, he made his decision. Protocol be damned. He would not let this child down. Not like he'd failed his daughter. Not again. He stood up, straightening his tie with precise movements. The action was deliberate, carrying all the authority of his position, backed by decades of respect earned in the courthouse. "I'm taking full responsibility for Maya's safety right now." Martin raised an eyebrow, concern etched across his features. "Henry, the legal implications—" But Calloway wasn't listening anymore. His focus was entirely on Maya, on the fragile trust in her eyes as she looked at him, on the way she held herself like someone expecting to be disappointed yet again. He'd protect her whatever it took, whatever it cost him. Some things were worth more than protocol and procedure. Some things were worth fighting for. The Monday morning air was crisp and biting as Judge Calloway approached the courthouse steps. A surge of reporters descended like hungry vultures, their cameras flashing in rapid succession, creating a strobe-like effect in the early light. Microphones thrust toward his face from every angle as questions flew from all directions, their voices overlapping in an aggressive chorus. "Judge Calloway, are you interfering in a foster care case? Did you remove a child from her legal guardians? What gives you the right to override the system? Is this a personal vendetta against the Coopers?" Calloway kept his face impassive, drawing on years of courtroom experience to maintain his composure. He pushed through the crowd with shoulders squared, his steps measured and deliberate, refusing to give them even a hint of the emotion churning beneath his stern exterior. Inside his office, Martin was wearing a path in the carpet, his usually cheerful face creased with worry. "This is bad, Henry. Really bad." He waved a morning newspaper, the pages crinkling loudly in his agitated hands. "They're twisting it, making you look like some vigilante judge who thinks he's above the law. The Coopers have filed a formal complaint with multiple allegations. If you fight this, you're risking everything. Your reputation, your career, maybe even your pension. They're out for blood." Calloway straightened papers on his desk, his movements precise and controlled, each motion a studied effort to maintain calm. If I don't fight it, who will? The system. The system? Calloway's hand slammed down on the stack of papers, making his coffee mug rattle. The same system that put her in that house? That missed the signs of abuse? That ignored her cries for help? In another part of the building, Ms. Harding sat in a meeting with her supervisors, the fluorescent lights harsh overhead. Her hands trembled as she took notes, her pen making uneven marks on the paper. Judge Calloway needs to return the child to proper channels immediately, her boss insisted, pacing behind his desk. This isn't just irregular, it's potentially illegal. We could all face consequences. The Coopers had been busy, working every angle they could find. Their lawyer had drafted a scathing complaint, painting them as victims of judicial overreach and abuse of power. They spoke to reporters about their beloved foster daughter being stolen from their home, carefully crafted tears sliding down their cheeks. Their crocodile tears made perfect television, and the media ate it up. Back in his office, Calloway watched Maya sitting cross-legged on the worn carpet, carefully coloring in a picture book Martin had brought her. Her bruises were still visible beneath her sleeves, but her eyes weren't quite as haunted as they had been days ago. She hummed softly to herself, lost in her artwork, her small hand gripping the crayon with determined focus. A clerk appeared at the door looking uncomfortable, with an official-looking envelope clutched in his trembling hands. From the Ethics Committee, Your Honor. They're demanding you release Maya to Child Services by tomorrow morning. Our face suspension pending investigation. They're not playing around. Maya looked up at the word release, her crayon freezing mid-stroke. Fear flickered across her face, her shoulders tensing as if preparing for another blow. Calloway took the envelope without opening it, his expression unchanging, though his jaw tightened imperceptibly. He knew there was no turning back now. Not when Maya's safety hung in the balance. Not when doing the right thing meant breaking all the rules. He'd rather lose his career than fail another child. Judge Calloway's office was silent except for the rustling of papers and the soft hum of Martin's laptop. Stacks of foster care reports covered every surface, their manila folders worn at the edges, some stained with coffee rings from late-night research sessions. Calloway's reading glasses sat low on his nose as he scrutinized another document, the furrow between his brows deepening with each line he read. "Look at this," he said, tapping the paper with his finger, his normally steady hand betraying a slight tremor of anger. The Coopers reported taking in 6 children last year, but their financial records only show stipends for 4. Where did the other 2 go? Martin leaned over, his tie nearly dragging across the keyboard, the screen's blue light reflecting off his worried face. And here, 3 different addresses in 2 years. They keep moving, probably to avoid detection. Classic pattern for people with something to hide. Ms. Harding slipped into the office, carefully closing the door behind her with a soft click. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a thick folder on Calloway's desk, her normally pristine appearance showing signs of stress, a loose strand of hair, slightly smudged mascara. These are all the complaints filed against them in the past 5 years. Most were conveniently lost in the system. I had to call in several favors to find them. Calloway opened the folder, his expression darkening as he read, the muscles in his jaw working. Physical neglect, emotional abuse, unsafe living conditions. His voice grew tight, barely containing his fury. They've been doing this for years, right under everyone's noses. Martin's fingers flew across the keyboard, the rapid clicking filling the tense silence. Got something. A girl named Sarah Mitchell. She was with them 3 years ago. She's 21 now. He turned the screen toward Calloway, hope lighting his features. And she's willing to talk. Says she's been waiting for someone to finally investigate them. The Coopers know we're investigating, Ms. Harding said quietly, wringing her hands. They're threatening to sue the department if we don't return Maya immediately. Their lawyer has already called twice today. Calloway stood, walking to his window. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion etched there. Let them try. We have enough here to bury them. I won't let them hurt another child. Martin printed another document, the printer whirring to life, adding it to their growing pile of evidence. Court date set for next week. Judge Matthews will hear the case. I made sure of it. Good. Calloway nodded, turning back to his desk. She's fair. She'll see the truth. She has children of her own. She'll understand what's at stake. He picked up a photo of Maya from his desk, her small face serious, her eyes holding too much pain for someone so young, the corners of the photograph worn from his frequent handling. The stack of damning evidence lay before him, each page revealing another piece of the Coopers' cruel operation, telling a story of greed and callous disregard for the children in their care. They had what they needed. The truth would finally come out, and the Coopers would face justice. Ms. Harding touched his arm gently, her voice soft but firm. You're doing the right thing, Henry. No matter what happens, that little girl needs someone to fight for her. Calloway nodded, his jaw set with determination. The court date was set. Now they just had to win. For Maya, for all the children who had suffered in silence. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations as people filed in, filling every available seat. Reporters clutched their notepads, their pens poised to capture every detail of what promised to be a landmark case. Maya sat next to Calloway, her small hands wrapped tightly around Oliver, the worn, stuffed rabbit that had seen her through so many dark nights in the Coopers' house. Her feet, now properly clad in new shoes, barely touched the floor. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. The presiding judge, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed glasses, entered the courtroom with measured steps, her black robes swishing softly. Once everyone was seated, the Coopers' lawyer stood adjusting his expensive silk tie and smoothing down his tailored suit. "Your Honor, this is a clear case of judicial overreach. Judge Calloway used his position to circumvent proper channels and illegally remove a child from her legal guardians. This sets a dangerous precedent." Randall and Sheila Cooper sat behind their lawyer, perfectly dressed and wearing practiced expressions of concern. Sheila dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her diamond rings catching the fluorescent light, while Randall kept his cold, calculating gaze fixed on Maya, his jaw clenched tight. When it was his turn, Calloway rose slowly, his shoulders straight despite the weight of the moment. His voice carried across the silent courtroom, steady and clear, filled with quiet conviction. "I didn't take her. She ran to me, because she was terrified." He gestured to Maya's still visible bruises, yellowing now, but unmistakable. "She came to the courthouse barefoot, in the cold, desperate to escape. No child does that without reason." Ms. Harding approached the witness stand next, her hands clasped tightly together, her social worker badge glinting under the lights. "I should have seen the signs," she admitted, guilt heavy in her voice. "Maya tried to tell me during check-ins, but the Coopers always interrupted, always had an explanation. I failed her by not digging deeper. The system failed her." The former foster child, Sarah Mitchell, took the stand. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped the wooden rail, but her voice was strong, determined. "I was in that house too. I know what Maya went through." She described the attic room, the hunger, the isolation, her words painting a vivid picture of neglect. "They don't care about children. They care about government checks. That's all we ever were to them, dollar signs." Throughout the testimony, Maya kept her eyes down, fingers working nervously at Oliver's worn ear, a habit that had become almost automatic. When asked to speak, she leaned close to the microphone, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling but resolute. "I don't want to go back. Please don't make me go back." The presiding judge listened to all testimonies with a furrowed brow, taking careful notes with a silver fountain pen. After the final arguments, she cleared her throat and adjusted her glasses. "This case requires careful consideration. I'll need time to review all evidence before making my decision. Court will reconvene in 3 days." As people filed out of the crowded courtroom, Sheila Cooper stepped into Calloway's path, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the malice in her eyes nor the twist of her carefully painted lips. "You think you've won, Judge?" she hissed through clenched teeth. "This isn't over." Calloway met her gaze steadily but said nothing, his hand protectively on Maya's shoulder as they walked past. Maya pressed closer to his side, clutching Oliver tighter, drawing strength from both her protectors, one stuffed, one very real. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Calloway, Maya, and Martin made their way outside. The tension that had gripped them all morning finally began to ease, replaced by a cautious optimism that hung in the crisp autumn air. Maya skipped down the steps, her dark curls bouncing with each movement, Oliver the rabbit swinging from her hand like a cherished dance partner. "Did you see their faces?" Martin whispered to Calloway, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. The Coopers looked scared. They weren't expecting such a strong case. Calloway nodded, watching Maya with a mixture of pride and concern. For the first time since she'd run to him that night, her shoulders weren't hunched with worry. The weight of fear seemed lifted, if only temporarily. She turned to face him, her brown eyes bright with hope, her smile spreading across her face like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Am I staying with you forever?" she asked, clutching Oliver to her chest so tightly that his worn ears flopped forward. Calloway's throat tightened, the familiar ache of responsibility and love making it hard to speak. He wanted to promise her everything would be okay, but years of legal experience had taught him not to make guarantees. "We're getting closer," he said gently, reaching out to smooth a wayward curl from her forehead. Back in his chambers, Martin paced the length of the room while Calloway reviewed their strategy, papers spread across his mahogany desk. "The former foster kid's testimony was powerful," Martin said, running a hand through his graying hair. "And Ms. Harding really came through for us with those records. The pattern of neglect is clear as day." "We need to," Calloway started, but his phone interrupted him with a sharp buzz. Ms. Harding's name flashed on the screen, making his stomach tighten with apprehension. "Henry, we have a problem." Her voice crackled with urgency through the speaker. "The Coopers just filed a counterclaim. They're saying you manipulated Maya, coached her to lie about the abuse. They're painting you as the villain." Calloway's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned white. "That's ridiculous. They know it's not true." "There's more," Ms. Harding continued, her voice heavy with concern. "They've assigned Janet Maxwell as Maya's new caseworker. She always sides with foster parents. Always. She's notorious for it." Martin watched Calloway's face darken like storm clouds gathering. "What is it? What's wrong?" "The Coopers are fighting back," Calloway said, hanging up the phone with a sharp click. "They're claiming I coerced Maya into lying. They're trying to turn this around on us." Through his office window, he could see Maya sitting at his assistant's desk, carefully coloring in a picture book someone had given her. Her small face was screwed up in concentration as she worked to stay within the lines. She looked so peaceful, so at home, her feet swinging freely beneath the chair. She had no idea that her world might be about to shift again, that the security she'd just begun to feel was already under threat. "I'm not losing her," Calloway said firmly, his jaw set with determination, his eyes never leaving Maya's small form. Not to them, not to anyone. Saturday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky, matching the mood in Calloway's home. Maya sat at the kitchen table, pushing her soggy cereal around without eating, the milk turning an unappetizing shade of beige. She hadn't slept well, neither had Calloway. Dark circles rimmed his eyes as he watched her, his coffee growing cold in his trembling hands. The ticking of the kitchen clock seemed unnaturally loud in the heavy silence between them. The sharp knock made them both jump. Maya's spoon clattered against the bowl, sending droplets of milk spattering across the wooden table. "Who is it?" Maya whispered, her small fingers gripping Calloway's sleeve so tight he could feel her nails through the fabric. The fear in her voice made his chest ache, bringing back memories of his daughter's own fears so many years ago. He knew. Of course he knew. The legal system he'd served for decades was now turning against him, like a faithful dog suddenly baring its teeth at its master. When he opened the door, Janet Maxwell stood there, her gray suit as crisp as her expression, not a hair out of place. Behind her, the Coopers lingered with poorly concealed satisfaction, like vultures waiting for their prey. Sheila's lips curved in a cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Judge Calloway," Maxwell said, extending a thick manila envelope that seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. "I have a court order. Maya must be placed back into state custody immediately." Maya's scream pierced the air like shattered glass. She ran to Calloway, wrapping her thin arms around his legs with desperate strength. "No, please, don't let them take me." "There must be something we can do," Calloway argued, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't hide. "She's traumatized. She needs stability." "What she needs," Maxwell cut in, her tone as sharp as a blade, "is to be placed with her legal guardians. Your interference has already caused enough disruption." Randall Cooper stepped forward, his massive frame filling the doorway like a dark cloud. "Come on, Maya. Time to go home." "That's not my home," Maya sobbed, clinging tighter to Calloway, her whole body trembling against his legs. Martin appeared from the living room, his face flushed with anger, his usually neat tie askew. "This is wrong, and you know it." Maxwell remained unmoved, her face a mask of bureaucratic indifference. "If you don't comply, I'll be forced to call the police." Calloway knelt down to Maya's level, his heart breaking as he looked into her tear-filled eyes, seeing all the trust and hope they'd built together crumbling away. "Maya, sweetheart, please don't let them take me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, Daddy." The word hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. Maxwell stepped forward and took Maya's arm, pulling her away despite her struggles and cries. Calloway watched, helpless, as they led her to the waiting government car, its engine humming like a funeral dirge. Maya pressed her face against the window as the car pulled away, her small hand leaving smudges on the glass. Her voice carried through the window, shattering what remained of Calloway's composure. "Daddy, no!" The car disappeared around the corner, taking with it the child who had somehow become his whole world in such a short time. Calloway stood in his doorway, fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white, his jaw aching from the effort of holding back his own tears. The Cooper's car followed, Sheila's triumphant smile visible through their tinted windows like a cruel taunt. Martin placed a steady hand on Calloway's shoulder, his grip firm and grounding. "What do we do now?" Calloway lifted his gaze from the empty street, something hardening in his expression, the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. "We fight." The silence in Calloway's house felt like a physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders with each step. His footsteps echoed through the empty hallway as he made his way to Maya's room, the sound haunting in its solitude. The door creaked open, revealing the perfectly made bed with its purple butterfly comforter, exactly as she'd left it that morning. A stuffed giraffe sat propped against the pillow. They'd bought it together just 3 days ago at the mall, Maya's eyes lighting up when she'd spotted it. His fingers traced the dresser where Maya had carefully arranged her few belongings, each item placed with deliberate care and hope. A half-finished drawing still lay on the small desk by the window, stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small, surrounded by hearts and flowers. The words, "My new," were written across the top in wobbly letters, the empty space where family should have been speaking volumes in its absence. Across town, in the sterile confines of the emergency foster facility, Maya curled up on a thin mattress, trying to make herself as small as possible. The institutional sheets scratched against her skin like sandpaper. She hugged Oliver close to her chest, her only friend from before, his fur damp with her tears and matted from years of similar nights. "He'll come for me," she whispered into Oliver's worn ear, her voice trembling but determined. "Judge Calloway won't forget me. He promised. He's different from the others." In their suburban home, the Coopers celebrated with expensive whiskey, their victory tasting sweet. Sheila's laugh carried through their pristine living room, sharp and cruel in the evening air. "Did you see his face?" she cackled, swirling her drink in its crystal glass. "All that power, and he couldn't do a thing, just another suit thinking he could interfere." Randall smiled coldly, his eyes calculating. "Nobody messes with our business. They never learn." Back at his house, Calloway stood in his kitchen, staring at the bottle of bourbon he'd pulled from the back of his cabinet, dust still coating its surface. His hand shook as he unscrewed the cap, memories of past pain threatening to overwhelm him. One drink, just to numb the pain. The doorbell rang, insistent and familiar. Martin's voice called through the door, concern evident in his tone. "Henry, I know you're in there. Don't do this to yourself." Calloway hesitated, then poured the bourbon down the sink, watching the amber liquid disappear. When he opened the door, Martin took one look at his haggard face and stepped inside, determination written across his features. "You can't let them win," Martin said firmly, gripping his friend's shoulder. "You're not done fighting. That little girl needs you." "They have the law on their side." Calloway's voice was rough with emotion and exhaustion. "Since when has that stopped you from finding justice?" Martin challenged, his eyes fierce. "You're a judge. You know there are always other angles. We just have to find them." Calloway straightened, something shifting in his eyes, a spark of the fighter he'd always been. He walked to his office, Martin following close behind. Sitting at his desk, he picked up his phone with renewed purpose. "Get me Jerry at the DA's office," he ordered, his voice steady now. "I need you to find me every piece of dirt on the Coopers, every inspection, every complaint, every paper trail. We take them down, all of them." The clock struck midnight as they began their work, papers spreading across the desk like battle plans. Maya's drawing still lay unfinished upstairs, but not forgotten. Never forgotten. This was just the beginning of the fight. The dim glow of the desk lamp cast long, foreboding shadows across Judge Henry Calloway's office, the weak light barely reaching the far corners of the room. Outside, the bustling city had fallen silent, but inside, Calloway's mind raced with a whirlwind of possibilities and consequences. Before him on the dark wood of his desk lay a crisp, white resignation letter, the culmination of 30 years of dedicated service, countless cases, and a reputation for unwavering fairness and justice. His pen hovered over the signature line, his hand trembling slightly as he recalled the heartbreaking image of Maya's tear-stained face being driven away. But that memory only steeled his resolve. Some things were worth more than a lifelong career. The sudden creak of the door and the familiar sound of Martin's footsteps broke the heavy silence. Without a word, Martin dropped a thick manila folder onto Calloway's desk, papers spilling out, bank statements, transfer records, suspicious patterns highlighted in yellow. "I found something," Martin said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "It's bad. For them." Calloway leaned forward, scanning the documents with widening eyes as he took in the numbers. State payments for dozens of foster children over the years, large deposits, mysterious withdrawals, and children who seemed to vanish from the system without explanation. "They've been doing this for years," Martin continued, pointing to the incriminating entries. "Taking in kids, collecting checks, then shuffling them off somewhere else. Some of these kids, there's no record of where they went." Calloway's hands clenched into fists, his jaw set with determination. "We're taking them down," he declared, reaching for the resignation letter with newfound purpose. His signature was firm and clear. No hesitation now. He couldn't fight this battle from behind the bench. He needed to be in the trenches. Across town, Maya sat on an unfamiliar bed in yet another temporary foster home, her small backpack zipped and ready beside her. The foster mother had tried to get her to unpack, but Maya just shook her head. "Judge Calloway's coming," she whispered to Oliver, her beloved stuffed rabbit. "We just have to wait." In her own office, Ms. Harding stared at her own resignation letter, her hands trembling as she typed out everything she knew about the Coopers. Years of ignored red flags, dismissed complaints, and children's voices silenced by bureaucracy and greed. She knew speaking out would jeopardize her career, but when she thought of Maya's bruises and all the children she'd failed to protect, she kept typing, her resolve unwavering. Calloway picked up his phone, punching in a number he knew by heart. His voice was steel when he spoke. "Get me a court date. We're not waiting anymore." The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as cameras clicked and reporters scribbled notes. Maya's small hand found Calloway's, and he gave it a gentle squeeze. Her purple dress, bought specially for today, made her look even tinier against the massive wooden bench before them. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The judge entered, his expression unreadable. Calloway stood, straightening his tie, Not wearing his judicial robes felt strange, but right. Today he wasn't fighting as a judge. He was fighting as a father. Martin sat behind them, manila folders and digital records ready. Ms. Harding fidgeted in her seat, her face pale but determined. Across the aisle, the Coopers sat with their lawyer, Sheila's usual sugary smile replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. "Your Honor," Calloway began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "What we're about to present isn't just about one child. It's about dozens of children who suffered under a broken system." He laid out the evidence methodically, bank statements showing suspicious patterns, foster children who vanished from records, multiple complaints buried under paperwork. The judge leaned forward, studying each document carefully. Ms. Harding took the stand next. "I knew something was wrong," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But every time I filed a report, it disappeared. The system, it protected them, not the children." When Maya's turn came, Calloway's heart nearly stopped. She looked so small approaching the witness stand, but when she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. "They hurt me," she said simply. "They locked me in the attic. They didn't feed me sometimes, and they'll keep hurting other kids if somebody doesn't stop them." "She's lying," Sheila Cooper suddenly screamed, jumping to her feet. "That little brat is making everything up." The outburst seemed to crack something in Randall Cooper. He stood up too, face red with rage. "You can't prove anything. Those kids were lucky to have a roof over their heads. We took them when nobody else would." "Order!" The judge's gavel cracked against wood. "Mr. Cooper, control yourself or you'll be removed." One by one, former foster children approached the stand. A teenager with haunted eyes, a young woman who still flinched at loud noises, a boy who hadn't spoken for months after leaving the Coopers' home. Their stories formed a devastating pattern. The judge listened to it all, his expression growing grimmer with each testimony. When the last witness stepped down, he cleared his throat. "I will review all evidence presented today and deliver my final ruling tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. His gavel fell with finality. Court is adjourned. As people began filing out, Maya tugged on Calloway's sleeve. Her brown eyes were wide with worry. "Are we going to win?" she whispered. Calloway looked down at this brave little girl who had changed his life forever. For the first time since this battle began, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of victory. The judge's gavel cracked through the air like thunder, silencing the packed courtroom. Maya's tiny fingers dug into Calloway's hand, her knuckles white with tension. Oliver, her faithful stuffed rabbit, was squeezed tight against her chest with her other arm. After reviewing all evidence presented, the judge began, his voice firm and clear. "This court finds Randall and Sheila Cooper unfit to serve as foster parents." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sheila's face contorted, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. She leaped to her feet, mascara running down her cheeks. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked. "We've done nothing wrong, nothing." Randall remained seated, his face growing darker by the second, jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched in his cheek. "Furthermore," the judge continued, raising his voice over Sheila's outburst, "due to the evidence of fraud and negligence, the Coopers will be formally investigated by the state." Two sheriff's deputies stepped forward, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. They approached the Coopers with handcuffs ready. Sheila's screams grew louder as the metal clicked around her wrists. Randall submitted silently, but his eyes burned with hatred as he glared at Calloway. Maya pressed herself closer to Calloway's side, trembling slightly as she watched her former foster parents being led away. The judge shuffled his papers, waiting for order to be restored in his courtroom. When silence finally fell again, he looked directly at Calloway. His expression softened slightly as he asked, "Mr. Calloway, do you still wish to adopt Maya Brooks?" Calloway's throat tightened with emotion. He stood tall, his voice unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor. More than anything." "Then I'm setting a final adoption hearing for next week. Until then, Maya will remain in your temporary custody." Maya launched herself into Calloway's arms, her small body shaking with joy. "You did it," she whispered against his neck, tears soaking into his collar. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the small adoption courtroom, casting a warm glow over the intimate gathering. Maya sat perfectly straight in her new blue dress, the fabric rustling as she fidgeted with excitement. Her dark curls were neatly braided, tied with matching blue ribbons. Oliver, her constant companion, rested in her lap. Beside her, Henry Calloway appeared more relaxed than anyone had seen him in years. His usual stern expression had softened, replaced by a quiet joy that seemed to radiate from within. Martin Thompson sat in the row behind them, beaming like a proud uncle while Ms. Harding dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The judge opened the thick file before him, reviewing the final documents. His eyes scanned the pages carefully, though his slight smile suggested this was more formality than scrutiny. "Maya," the judge said kindly, leaning forward to address her directly. "I need to ask you an important question. Do you want Henry Calloway to be your father?" Maya's face lit up, her brown eyes sparkling. Without a moment's hesitation, she declared, "He already is." A ripple of gentle laughter and sniffles filled the room. Calloway swallowed hard, fighting back tears. The judge nodded, clearly moved. He lifted his gavel, and the sound of it connecting with the wooden block echoed through the courtroom. "Then, by the power vested in me by the state, I hereby grant this adoption. Maya Brooks is now legally Maya Calloway." Maya launched herself into Calloway's arms with such force that his chair rocked backward. He caught her, holding her tight as tears finally spilled down his cheeks. She buried her face in his shoulder, her small body shaking with happy sobs. Outside the courthouse, Maya's hand found Calloway's, gripping it tightly. The spring breeze ruffled her dress as she looked up at him, her face glowing with pure joy. "What do we do now, Daddy?" Calloway smiled down at his daughter. "We go home." The evening sun painted the courthouse steps in shades of amber and gold as Henry Calloway and Maya stepped outside. The little girl's hand gripped his tightly, her small fingers intertwined with his larger ones as if she feared he might vanish like a dream. Oliver, her stuffed rabbit, was tucked securely under her other arm. "What now?" Maya whispered, her brown eyes wide with uncertainty. Calloway knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. His knees protested against the hard concrete, but he didn't care. "Now, we go home." The word home hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than just 4 simple letters. Maya's lips trembled slightly as she processed its meaning. Martin Thompson approached them, his face split with a wide grin. He clapped Calloway on the back, the sound echoing in the quiet evening air. "So, how does it feel to be a dad again?" Calloway exhaled slowly, his chest tight with emotion. Years of buried feelings surfaced all at once. Grief for his lost daughter, joy for his new one, fear of failing, hope for the future. He couldn't find the words to answer. Maya shifted from foot to foot, her small face scrunched in thought. "Do I have to call you Judge Calloway?" she asked hesitantly. His expression softened as he shook his head. "You can call me whatever you want, kiddo." There was a long pause. Maya stared at her shoes, gathering courage. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Daddy?" The word hit Calloway like a physical force. His throat tightened, and he had to blink rapidly to keep his composure. Ms. Harding approached, her eyes still damp from the ceremony. "I'll be checking in next month," she said warmly, "but just as a friend this time." She knelt down to hug Maya. "You take care of your dad, okay?" Maya nodded solemnly, still holding tight to Calloway's hand. As they walked toward the car, Maya looked up at him with hopeful eyes. "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" Calloway couldn't help but chuckle, the sound rusty but genuine. "You can have whatever you want." Martin watched them from the courthouse steps, shaking his head in wonder at how much had changed in just a few months. The stern, isolated judge he'd known for years had transformed into something else entirely, a father. The porch light cast a warm glow as Henry Calloway unlocked his front door. He stepped aside, gesturing for Maya to enter first, but she froze at the threshold. Her small fingers clutched Oliver tighter, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Are you sure I can come in?" The question hit Calloway like a physical blow. How many times had this child been turned away? How many doors had been closed in her face? He swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. "Maya, this is your home now." She took a tentative step forward, then another. Her eyes darted around the living room, taking in everything. The comfortable couch, the soft rug, the family photos on the wall. She reached out to touch the edge of the coffee table, then quickly pulled her hand back. "It's okay," Calloway assured her. "You can touch things. This is your house too." Maya moved through the rooms like she was exploring a museum, afraid to disturb anything. When they reached the stairs, Calloway gently guided her up to the second floor. "I have something to show you," he said, stopping at a door painted light blue. "This is your room." Maya's eyes widened as he opened the door. The bedroom was everything a little girl could want. Soft yellow walls, a twin bed with a purple comforter, white bookshelves filled with children's books, and a collection of stuffed animals arranged on the pillow. A small desk sat beneath the window, complete with colored pencils and drawing paper. Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she stood in the doorway. "This is really mine?" Calloway nodded, his own vision blurring slightly. "All yours." She walked into the room slowly, touching everything: the soft blanket, the smooth desk surface, the spines of the books. When she opened the dresser drawers to find new clothes inside, she gasped. "You can pick out your own pajamas for bedtime," Calloway said. "Whatever you want to wear." Maya selected purple pajamas with stars on them, handling them like they were made of gold. After she changed, they headed downstairs to the kitchen. "Pancakes for dinner?" Calloway asked, remembering her request from earlier. Maya's face lit up. "Really? Really?" They made pancakes together, getting flour on their clothes and laughing when Calloway accidentally flipped one onto the counter instead of the pan. Maya sat at the kitchen table, not on the floor, not alone in her room, but at the table like a real family. After dinner, they returned to her room for bedtime. Maya picked out a book called Goodnight Moon, and Calloway sat on the edge of her bed to read it. His voice was rusty at first. He hadn't read a bedtime story in years, but he soon found the rhythm. When the story was finished, Maya snuggled down into her new bed, Oliver tucked securely under her arm. Calloway pulled the covers up to her chin and smoothed a stray curl from her forehead. He stood and walked to the door, reaching for the light switch. Just before he turned it off, Maya's small voice filled the darkness. "Good night, Daddy." The words washed over him like a warm wave, filling an empty space in his heart he'd carried for so long. For the first time since losing his daughter, Henry Calloway felt whole again. Sunlight streamed through Maya's bedroom window, warming her face. She blinked, momentarily confused by the soft sheets and comfortable bed. Her heart raced as she tried to remember where she was. Then it hit her. This was her room, her real room in her new home. She sat up, clutching Oliver to her chest, and listened carefully. Usually mornings meant angry voices and stomping feet, but today she heard something different, the sizzle of bacon and the clatter of pans. Her stomach rumbled at the smell. Maya slid out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. She was still wearing the new pajamas Calloway had bought her, pink with little stars. They were so soft, nothing like the threadbare hand-me-downs she was used to. Following the sounds and smells, Maya crept down the stairs. In the kitchen, she found Calloway standing at the stove, wearing a dress shirt and tie with an apron over top. He was frowning at a pan where a pancake had turned an alarming shade of brown. "You hungry?" he asked, noticing her in the doorway. He flipped the pancake, revealing an even darker bottom side. Maya couldn't help it. A small giggle escaped her lips. "You're bad at this." Calloway's serious expression cracked into a smirk. "I'm out of practice," he admitted, scraping the burnt pancake onto a plate. "It's been a while since I cooked for anyone but myself." Maya climbed onto a chair at the kitchen table, watching as Calloway placed a plate in front of her. The pancake was definitely burnt, but the bacon looked perfect. There was even a glass of orange juice waiting for her. "You can eat whatever you want," Calloway said, sitting down across from her. "No rules about waiting or leftovers here." Maya picked up her fork, still hesitant. Really? Really? Calloway cut into his own burnt pancake, making an exaggerated face at the taste that made Maya giggle again. They ate together, talking about small things. Calloway asked if she slept well, if her room was warm enough, if she needed anything. Nobody had ever asked Maya these questions before. When they finished, Maya carried her plate to the sink like she'd been taught. She turned back to Calloway, her voice small but serious. "Are you going to leave me, like everyone else?" Calloway immediately knelt down to her level, his eyes meeting hers. "Never," he said firmly. "You're my daughter now, Maya. That means forever." Henry Calloway stood in front of Maya's closet early Monday morning, his hands hovering uncertainly over the crisp navy uniform hanging there. The white collar was perfectly pressed, the pleated skirt laying just so. But it was Maya's mass of beautiful curls that had him worried. "I don't know how to do little girl hair," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his own short-cropped hair. Maya appeared behind him, still in her star-covered pajamas. "Me neither," she said softly. Calloway turned to look at his daughter. His daughter, he thought, with a mixture of wonder and terror. "Well, we'll figure it out together then." In the bathroom, Calloway carefully ran a comb through Maya's curls, wincing every time she flinched at a tangle. "Sorry, sweetheart," he said, trying to be gentler. After several attempts, he managed to gather her hair into what he hoped was a presentable ponytail, even if it sat slightly crooked on her head. Maya examined herself in the mirror, turning her head from side to side. She shrugged, offering him a small smile. "It's not bad." The drive to school was quiet. Calloway's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he navigated through morning traffic. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Maya, who sat perfectly still in the back seat, her small hands folded in her lap. When they pulled up to the school gates, Maya didn't move. Other children streamed past their car, laughing and chattering with friends. Maya's eyes followed them, and Calloway could see the fear creeping into her expression. "Hey," he said softly, turning in his seat to face her. "You okay?" Maya nodded, but her lower lip trembled slightly. What if they don't like me?" "They'll love you," Calloway assured her, though his own heart ached at her uncertainty. "And I'll be right here when school lets out. Same spot, okay?" Maya took a deep breath, squaring her tiny shoulders. She looked so brave and so vulnerable at the same time that Calloway felt his throat tighten. Then, with one last glance at him, she pushed open the car door and stepped out. Calloway watched as she walked toward the building, her new backpack almost as big as she was. Just before she reached the doors, she turned and gave him a small wave. Then she disappeared inside. He sat there for a long moment, feeling an overwhelming mixture of pride and protectiveness. For the first time in his life, he wasn't defined by his role as a judge. He was something far more important now. He was a father. Henry Calloway stood outside the elementary school, watching streams of children burst through the doors and race to waiting parents. His heart clenched as he searched the faces, looking for Maya. When she finally appeared, his smile faded. She walked slowly, her new backpack hanging low, her eyes fixed on the ground. No excitement, no running to greet him. Something was wrong. "Hey, kiddo," he called softly as she approached. Maya didn't look up, just walked to the car and climbed in silently. During the drive home, Calloway kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Maya stared out the window, her reflection showing eyes that seemed far away. "How was school?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. She shrugged, continuing to watch the buildings pass by. "Did you meet any new friends?" Another shrug. At dinner, Maya pushed her spaghetti around her plate, barely taking 2 bites. Calloway watched her, his own appetite gone. He'd thought providing a safe home, good food, and clean clothes would be enough. Now, watching his daughter retreat into herself, he realized how wrong he'd been. The doorbell rang and Martin Thompson stepped in, carrying a stack of files. He took one look at Maya's untouched plate and Calloway's worried expression and understood. "Hey, Maya," Martin said gently. "Mind if I steal your dad for a minute?" In Calloway's office, Martin closed the door. Rough first day? She won't talk to me, Calloway admitted, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what to do. Henry, Martin said carefully, she's been through hell. The Coopers, the system being taken away from you. That doesn't just disappear because you signed adoption papers. I know that, Calloway snapped, then immediately regretted it. Do you? Martin asked. Because you're acting like she should just snap into being a normal kid. She needs time. She needs to learn that you're not going to hurt her or abandon her like everyone else has. Calloway sank into his chair, the weight of Martin's words hitting him. How do I show her that? By being there, even when she pushes you away, especially then. Later that night, Calloway stood outside Maya's bedroom door. He could hear her sniffling inside, talking quietly to Oliver, her stuffed rabbit. His hand hovered over the doorknob, wanting desperately to go in and comfort her. But Martin's words echoed in his mind. She needed time. He knocked softly. Maya? I'm right here if you need me. No response came, just more quiet sniffling. Calloway leaned his forehead against the door, feeling completely helpless. For the first time since becoming a father again, he realized that love alone wasn't enough. He had no idea how to heal the wounds that ran so deep in his daughter's heart. The scream pierced the night like a knife, jolting Henry Calloway from his sleep. His heart pounded as he threw off his covers and raced down the hallway to Maya's room. Inside, he found her thrashing against her sheets, tears streaming down her face even in sleep. No, don't make me go back, please, Maya cried out, her small hands gripping her blanket so tightly her knuckles were white. Maya, Calloway called softly, approaching her bed carefully. Maya, wake up. She continued to struggle, caught in her nightmare. I'll be good, I promise. Don't let them take me. Calloway gently placed his hand on her shoulder, giving her a slight shake. Maya, honey, wake up. You're safe. Maya's eyes flew open with a gasp. For a moment, she stared at him without recognition, pure terror in her expression. Then awareness flooded back, and she launched herself into his arms, sobbing into his chest. Her small fingers clutched his t-shirt desperately. They were coming to get me, she choked out between sobs. The Coopers, they found me and… Shh, Calloway soothed, holding her close. They can't hurt you anymore. You're safe here. Maya's whole body trembled as she pressed closer to him. But what if they come back? What if they make me go with them again? That will never happen, Calloway said firmly, though his heart ached at her fear. They're in jail, Maya. They can't hurt any more children. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. Promise? I promise. He brushed a curl from her damp forehead. And I promise I will always protect you. Maya's lower lip quivered. That's what my last foster mom said too. But then she got sick of me. The raw pain in her voice made Calloway's chest tight. He shifted to sit more comfortably on her bed, keeping her secure in his arms. I'm not your foster parent, Maya. I'm your father. Forever. She didn't respond, but her grip on his shirt loosened slightly. Calloway began to rock her gently, humming an old lullaby his wife used to sing to their daughter. Gradually, Maya's sobs quieted to hiccups, then to steady breathing. Even after she fell asleep, Calloway couldn't bring himself to leave. He sat beside her bed, watching her peaceful face in the dim glow of her nightlight. The fear and pain she'd shown broke his heart. He'd known she was traumatized, but seeing it so rawly displayed made him realize just how deep those wounds ran. Maya shifted in her sleep, mumbling something he couldn't quite catch. Her hand still gripped his shirt loosely, as if making sure he wouldn't disappear. Calloway adjusted her blanket with his free hand, tucking it around her shoulders. Sitting there in the quiet darkness, he made a silent vow to be the father she deserved, to prove that not everyone would abandon her, that she was worthy of love and protection. No matter how long it took, he would help her heal. Henry Calloway stood at the school gates, checking his watch for the third time. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the playground as parents gathered, waiting for their children. His eyes remained fixed on the school entrance, searching for Maya's familiar figure. When she finally emerged, something was different. Instead of walking alone with her head down, Maya had company. A small girl with bouncing pigtails walked beside her, talking animatedly with her hands waving in the air. Maya wasn't saying much, but Calloway noticed how she kept glancing at the other girl, a hint of interest in her expression. "And then my cat knocked over the whole glass of milk," the pigtail girl exclaimed, giggling. Maya's lips twitched upward slightly. Not quite a smile, but closer than anything Calloway had seen at school pickup before. As they approached, Ms. Harper, Maya's teacher, stepped out behind them. She caught Calloway's eye and gave him an encouraging nod. "Who's your friend?" Calloway asked gently as Maya reached him. Maya ducked her head, fidgeting with her backpack strap. After a moment, she mumbled, "Emma." "Hi," Emma waved enthusiastically. "Maya sat with me at lunch today. Well, actually, I sat with her because she was all alone, and nobody should eat lunch alone. That's what my mom says. Do you want to come over sometime, Maya? I have a treehouse." Maya's eyes widened slightly at the invitation, but before she could respond, Emma's mother called her name. "See you tomorrow," Emma called, skipping away. Ms. Harper approached them. "Maya had a good day today," she said warmly. "I noticed her participating more in group activities." That evening at dinner, Calloway served spaghetti, Maya's favorite. Usually their meals were quiet affairs, but tonight was different. "Emma has a cat named Pickles," Maya said suddenly, pushing her meatball around her plate. "It's orange." Calloway kept his voice casual, though his heart leaped at her voluntary conversation. "That's a funny name for a cat." "She named it that because it got stuck in a pickle jar when it was little." Maya took a bite of spaghetti. "Emma talks a lot." "Does that bother you?" Maya shook her head slowly. She doesn't make me talk back. She just talks." She twirled her fork in the pasta. "She asked me to sit with her tomorrow, too." Calloway watched as Maya continued eating, noticing how her shoulders seemed less tense than usual. For the first time since she'd started school, she wasn't eating as if she needed to finish quickly and escape. Instead, she took her time, occasionally offering another small detail about her day. He didn't push or ask too many questions. He just listened, savoring each voluntary word as a sign that maybe, just maybe, Maya was starting to feel secure enough to let someone else into her world. Calloway's keys jingled as he opened the front door, his briefcase heavy after a long day at work. The sound that greeted him made him pause, laughter, bright and genuine, coming from the living room. Not just one voice, but two. He stepped quietly into the doorway and felt his heart squeeze at the sight. Maya sat cross-legged on the carpet, her curls falling around her face as she leaned over a colorful board game. Across from her, Emma Carter was dramatically counting spaces with her game piece, making exaggerated faces that had Maya covering her mouth to stifle her giggles. 6, 7, 8. Emma landed on a space and threw her hands up. "Oh no! Back to start." Instead of withdrawing like she usually did when things went wrong, Maya actually laughed out loud. The sound filled the room, pure and unrestrained. Calloway couldn't remember ever hearing her laugh like that before. A knock at the door made him turn. Martin Thompson stood there holding a stack of files. His eyebrows shot up at the sounds of merriment coming from inside. "Did you bribe her with ice cream?" Martin whispered teasingly as he stepped in. Calloway shook his head, his voice soft with wonder. "She's finally getting comfortable." They watched as Emma rolled the dice again, both girls completely absorbed in their game. Maya's shoulders were relaxed, her movements natural and easy. For the first time since he'd known her, there wasn't a trace of fear or wariness in her expression. Mrs. Carter arrived shortly after to pick up Emma. She pulled Calloway aside while the girls said goodbye. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Emma told me about Maya's past. It means so much that you've helped her feel safe enough to have friends over." Calloway watched as Maya walked Emma to the door, the two girls already making plans for next time. His daughter, and his heart still jumped a little at that word, was smiling, really smiling. That night as he tucked Maya into bed, she looked up at him with clear eyes. "I had fun today." "Me too, kiddo," Calloway replied softly. He noticed that for the first time, Oliver the stuffed rabbit sat untouched at the foot of the bed instead of clutched tightly in Maya's arms. She didn't need that security tonight. She felt safe enough without it. The courtroom felt different this morning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting a warm glow across the polished wooden benches. The usual tension that filled these halls was replaced by something lighter, something hopeful. Henry Calloway sat at the table, his hands clasped tightly together. His suit was perfectly pressed, his tie straightened 3 times before entering. Beside him, Maya's feet swung back and forth, not quite reaching the floor. She clutched Oliver, her faithful stuffed rabbit, wearing a new blue dress picked out specially for today. Martin Thompson sat directly behind them, leaning forward with an encouraging smile. Ms. Harding dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, trying to maintain her professional composure, but failing miserably. The judge shuffled through his papers, each rustle making Maya grip Oliver tighter. Finally, he looked up, his expression serious but kind. "Do you still wish to proceed with this adoption?" Calloway's voice came out clear and strong despite the emotion threatening to crack it. "Without question." The judge turned his attention to Maya, his features softening. "And what about you, young lady? Do you want Henry Calloway to be your father?" Maya swallowed hard, her small fingers digging into Oliver's worn fur. But when she spoke, her voice carried through the courtroom without a hint of doubt. "I already told you. He's my dad." A few chuckles rippled through the room, quickly stifled. The judge's lips twitched in what might have been a smile as he reviewed the final paperwork. He carefully read through Calloway's credentials, his case history, the home study reports. Then came the moment they'd been waiting for. The judge pushed the adoption papers across the table. Calloway helped Maya hold the pen, his hand steady over her smaller one as she carefully wrote her new name, Maya Elizabeth Calloway. The sound of the gavel hitting wood echoed through the courtroom. "The adoption is granted." Before the echo had even faded, Calloway swept Maya into his arms as she burst into delighted laughter. Martin stepped forward, clapping Calloway's shoulder firmly. "You did it." Maya's arms wrapped tightly around Calloway's neck and she whispered in his ear, words meant just for him. "We did it." The kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator as Calloway reached into his jacket pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a small plastic card. Maya sat at the kitchen table, her legs swinging beneath her chair, Oliver tucked safely in her lap. "I have something for you," Calloway said, holding out the card. Maya took it carefully as if it might break. Her eyes widened as she read the name printed in bold black letters. Maya Calloway. Her voice was barely above a whisper as her finger traced each letter, taking in every detail of her new identity. The kitchen light caught the glossy surface of the ID card as she turned it over and over in her small hands. She read it again, then again, like she was trying to memorize every word, every number. Finally, she looked up at Calloway, her brown eyes studying his face with an intensity that made his heart ache. "Did I really get to keep you?" Her voice wavered between hope and disbelief. Calloway knelt down in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. His voice was steady, certain. "Forever." Maya's hands gripped the ID card tighter. "No more moving? No more moving. No more leaving. Never again. This is really my home now? This is your home. You're Maya Calloway now, and nothing can change that." Maya looked down at the card again, then back at him. "Promise?" "I promise." He reached out and took her small hand in his. "You know what this means? It means you're stuck with me. Through homework and vegetables and bedtime stories. Through good days and bad days. Through everything." For the first time since he'd known her, Maya launched herself into his arms without hesitation. Her small body trembled against his chest as she hugged him fiercely. They sat together on the couch later that evening, Maya still holding her new ID card. The TV played softly in the background, but neither was really watching it. Maya leaned against Calloway's side, comfortable in a way she'd never been before. "Thank you for choosing me." she whispered into the quiet room. Calloway squeezed her hand gently. You chose me too. Colorful balloons bobbed gently against the ceiling, casting dancing shadows on the hardwood floor. The Happy Birthday Maya banner stretched across the living room wall, its bright letters sparkling with glitter. Maya stood in the doorway, frozen, her eyes wide as she took in the decorations, the pile of wrapped presents, and the chocolate cake with 8 unlit candles. This is all for me? She whispered, clutching Oliver to her chest. Calloway grinned, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Of course. You're turning 8, kiddo. Maya touched one of the balloons softly, like it might pop if she pressed too hard. I've never had a real party before. Emma burst through the front door, her pigtails bouncing with excitement. Maya! Happy birthday! She thrust a wrapped package into Maya's arms. Open mine first! For a moment, Maya looked overwhelmed, but then a smile spread across her face. Emma grabbed her hand, tugging her toward the game setup in the corner. Come on, we're playing Pin the Tail on the Donkey first. Maya's laughter rang out clear and bright as Emma spun her around, blindfold in place. The sound made Calloway pause. He realized he'd never heard her truly laugh before, free and unguarded. Martin appeared beside him, watching the scene with a knowing smile. You've done good, Henry. He nudged Calloway's shoulder. Really good. Calloway couldn't take his eyes off Maya as she stumbled around, giggling, trying to pin the paper tail somewhere near the donkey poster. More kids arrived, classmates from school who had slowly become friends. They gathered around, cheering Maya on, their voices filling the house with the kind of joy it hadn't known in years. Pride swelled in Calloway's chest as he watched Maya move easily among her friends, no longer the scared little girl who had run to him in the night. She was just a child now, celebrating her birthday like any other 8-year-old should. When it came time for the cake, Maya's eyes sparkled in the glow of the 8 candles. Everyone gathered around, singing Happy Birthday. Maya's smile was so wide it looked like it might split her face. Calloway leaned down close to her ear. What did you wish for? Maya beamed up at him, her eyes shining with happiness. I finally know what to wish for, Daddy. The soft glow of Maya's new nightlight cast warm shadows across her bedroom walls. Birthday decorations sparkled in the dim light. Streamers hanging from the ceiling, balloons tied to her bedpost, and a pile of carefully arranged presents in the corner. Maya lay tucked under her favorite purple blanket, Oliver clutched loosely in one arm, her eyes heavy with happy exhaustion. Calloway sat on the edge of her bed, gently brushing a stray curl from her forehead. Did you have fun today? Maya nodded sleepily, a content smile playing on her lips. Best day ever. Her voice was thick with approaching sleep. Looking around the room, Calloway marveled at how different everything was now. Just months ago, this had been a spare room, empty and cold. Now it was filled with stuffed animals, books, and drawings taped to the walls. Maya's homework sat on her little desk and clothes spilled out of her dresser drawers. It wasn't just a room anymore. It was a home. He thought about his own transformation. The strict, unyielding judge who lived by the letter of the law had become something else entirely. A father. Someone who made pancakes, still badly, helped with homework and learned to do crooked ponytails. Someone who checked under the bed for monsters and kept the nightlight on. Maya's eyes fluttered open slightly, fighting against sleep. Are you gonna leave? The question held no fear now, not like before. It was just a child wanting reassurance. Calloway shook his head, squeezing her small hand. I'm right here. She smiled, already drifting off. For the first time since she'd come to live with him, there was no tension in her shoulders, no worry lines creasing her young forehead. She wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop or for everything to be taken away. She was just a little girl, falling asleep after her birthday party. Calloway watched as her breathing evened out, remembering that day in the courtroom when a small voice had cut through his carefully ordered world. You make the rules, right? Change them. She had changed everything, not just the rules, but him too. He adjusted her blanket, tucking it around her shoulders. Oliver slipped from her loose grip, and Calloway carefully placed the stuffed rabbit back in her arms. She didn't stir, didn't wake in panic like she used to. She just slept, peaceful and secure. "Good night, sweetheart," he whispered. Family isn't always by blood, but by the ones who refuse to let you go. If you enjoyed the story of Henry, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch. If you enjoyed the story of Henry, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.